You have your first idea for a movie. You decide to get together with another student or two and you decide to take your hand at this. One of the students is really good at special effects. You got everything except a budget. Welcome to Mud on a Monday, a series highlighting the setbacks along the path to success of individuals who are prominent in their craft. From politicians, business tycoons, and technological visionaries to legends of sports, music, TV, film, and of course, video games. So let's dig in. So, for this episode, I wanted to look at John Carpenter. So, before we get into that, just a little message. I hope you're all staying safe. Please practice social distancing. We will get through this. I'm thinking about all of you. Have a great one. Have a good day. Take care of your loved ones. And we'll see you soon. So, you have no budget. You want to make a movie, but you got no budget. So, when we get started in game development, it's so easy to get trapped into the thinking that you need tons of money to make and release your games. It's really hard sometimes to remember that even if you start with no skills at all in this endeavor, you still have some type of currency to put towards that growth. Time and money. So usually most of us have one going for us. If not, maybe you have the skills going for you, but usually one of those three is working for you. So this episode is on having very little money and making shit happen. If we have lots of time but no money to buy assets or the like, we have to use that time. That's a potential monster of an ally right there. Just like an RPG, in the beginning our level is weak. But as we see more battles, we'll grow stronger. So having that time in abundance is a privilege. Tomorrow, things might change for you. We can't let a lack of funds limit our ability to create. Fuck that. So, we have to finish a game, then finish another and another. As John Carpenter says, you have to make the very best of any opportunity that you get. So, make as many games as you can. Pour all of your heart, soul, mind, all of it into your work. Use all the techniques you've learned and maybe you'll have a couple aces or two up your sleeves, Once you add them all to your portfolio, you now have something to show. You may not have anyone knocking on your door when you're done with your education, be it through a university, learning from a mentor, or just YouTube. I'm hoping to have my first game finished by the end of this month or first few weeks of April. But worst case scenario, I'm shooting for the end of spring. And if there's one thing I've taken to heart, it's that you don't need a single damn penny to get your ideas into a game engine and release that to the world. You just keep polishing that up from there. Sure, you want better art, better music, better code to do more with, and all of that can be paid for to get better quality than what you might be able to do on your own. But it's not like you're under this pressure to create something amazing. Likely, there's no one out here bugging you to, hey, release something new. Hey, release something new. So don't rush it. Just give it all you got. Find ways to get creative in order to get past obstacles like, we don't have enough money to do that. Or, but I don't know how to code that. I can't do that. Or, this art I made just isn't good enough. This music I made makes me cringe. Or whatever it is. Sometimes you have to get out of your own way and just say, hey, it's going out like that. Oh well. Not to put out poor quality either. I mean, when you're looking or listening to poor quality. You know that. But remember, even the most famous of artists can suffer from imposter syndrome. So it can really help to show someone else your work if you're in doubt, if you don't know if you're being just too hard on yourself, or maybe it sucks. So it really helps to have some honest feedback from someone that you trust. But if you do something and you're pretty decent at it and you're still pretty hard on yourself, that's just how you are. So for those people specifically, sometimes you just gotta let it go as it is. It's good enough. And sometimes good enough is more than enough already. You have already proven yourself, so to speak. So the point is to get as many completed and released games under your belt. Nobody's gonna want to play that any of those games in some massive graveyard of projects, because those games are incomplete and likely won't show enough to appreciate all the time you've put into your work. That's where completed and released games really help. So in this episode, we're going to look at the low budget work made by John Carpenter in his early career. So specifically, we're going to discuss the things he did between his time at UCLA from 1968 until 1976 when he directed Assault on Precinct 13. So the early portfolio of John Carpenter I thought was really worth examining for us game developers, as doing our work on a limited budget is simply the reality of many indie game developers and indie game companies. How can we turn this nickel into a quarter and make it look like $1? How do we do that? So John was a master at that. I mean, the guy's an amazing director. He really is. But the way his brain works to get the vision, that Dumbledore effect, literally pulling it out of his head. How the hell does this man do it on such limited budgets? So I wanted to dig in a little bit. And I'm a big fan of John Carpenter. I love Assault on Precinct 13. I watch it fairly consistently. I love Halloween. I've seen Dark Star, so I nevertheless wanted to dig in deeper, and I found some really cool facts that I wanted to share. I instantly knew I had to share this, so let's dig in. Let me stop talking. So, what's John Carpenter's origin story, right? So, he was born into a creative family. His father was a music professor, and he received his musical education for some time from here. Later on, this would pay off tremendously in his films. But at the time, he was just learning music, theory, how to play instruments, the basics, piano. So his mother, though, she was the movie fanatic, and from what I could gather, it seems they went pretty frequently. So the young John fell in love with the films of Howard Hawks and John Ford. These are directors who learned during the silent film era, gained all of those cinematic techniques for film, and evolved with the audio being introduced. And so that's why if you go back and see specifically movies by like Howard Hawks, there's just a level of polish that, damn, talk about fundamentals. Just fantastic. I've seen a couple. I definitely saw Rio Bravo a few times, and you can see what John falls in love with, as a lot of that comes out in his own films, especially in Assault on Precinct 13. So he was already making his own 8mm horror short stories films before he was even high school. So I knew this one kid in high school who would make movies with his friends, and they were in high school, and it was mind-blowing to all of us that there was someone in our class in their spare time making little movies. No over-the-top production, very goofy, but pretty damn cool, because you're not even an adult and you're already out there learning these techniques. You're already out there finding your own identity for your creative output. You're already learning to use your equipment and how to do more with less. Because oftentimes, you don't have everything you need when you're coming up, especially when you're really young, right? It can be tougher. Tell your parents, hey, listen, I really need this $500 camera. Also, I'm going to need a lot of film. Could you get me a boom mic, boom pole? That'd be great. And it just blow up from there. Your poor mother, your poor father will have no wallet. So it can be tough. You got to get creative, right? So John was no different. He was not going to be limited. And so he was just out there, creative, developing. So he decided to move to California all the way from Bowling Green, Kentucky, where he lived. And that's where he grew up, even though he was not born there. So in 1968, he transfers over from Kentucky and into USC's School of Cinematic Arts. And so in his first year at USC, he created an 8-minute short film, which hadn't even been seen publicly until 2011. And so it was found at the USC vaults, and it's best known for showing glimpses of what Carpenter would use in 1978's Halloween. So in 1970, he decides to collaborate with 3 other USC film students. Nick Castle, who was the cinematographer, John, I hope I'm not butchering this, John Longenecker, he was the producer, and James Rokos was the director. John Longenecker is a name that has a lot of credits to that. Nick Castle would become a director in his own right, but he also played The Shape, aka Michael Myers, in the first 2 Halloween films. So John Carpenter, in this little group of 4, was the film's editor and music composer. The 20-minute film that they made was produced on a minute budget, $700, which today would be about $5,000. Sounds like a lot. Tell a amateur filmmaker that they're gonna have a little crew and do it with $5,000. Those are miracle workers right there. So the film went on to actually win the 1970 Academy Award for Best Live Action Short Film. While not the director and not his idea, it was John Longenecker's, Carpenter may have learned even more about keeping costs low on such a shoestring budget as this was made with. So the film's title was The Resurrection of Bronco Billy. And while it did, add another good piece of, I guess you could say, another good credit to John's name, it didn't exactly set the world on fire. And it didn't exactly lead up to what he thought it could, So, also in 1970, he begins working on a little student film that they've decided to call Dark Star. And he works with Dan O'Bannon, who was the future creator of the Alien franchise and who, for a short stint, worked with George Lucas on Star Wars. This project would last the next 4 years and take him into the public eye, for better or worse. So, starting with an initial budget of $1,000 from USC, the film was shot on 16mm film. By the time it had 45 minutes of footage, the budget had now grown to $6,000. How this happened, though, is pretty damn cool to see. It's not like he just went in there and, hey, I need more. No. God, no. So, the amount of hoops that John Carpenter says that they had to jump through to get this sci-fi comedy out there is pretty impressive. Maybe that's just how it is, but nevertheless, I thought it was pretty cool. So, here's what he does. They would shoot some scene, not on a schedule. They would edit that out, make it look good, and then come back to USC, show it to them, ask for a bigger budget, then go and repeat that process over and over. So it wasn't like typical movies made where you have this shooting schedule, and no, that assumes you have a budget. They only had enough budget for a scene at a time. And so they didn't have anything like that. It was a super bare bones budget that Carpenter says There was no real schedule due to the tiny budget. They had huge ambitions for the film, and Carpenter says that in the end, that really did show. And I've seen Dark Star, it does. So we're going to talk about that a little more. So while Carpenter and O'Bannon had a falling out later on, which makes, when you read back through the quotes of what they think of this film, it seems they would rather both just kind of not necessarily pretend that it never happened, but it's in the early work for a reason. It was a student film for a reason. I feel a bit differently, but I suppose if I was looking back like that too, I'd probably have my reservations, right? Especially if you went on to do much better work. It's not like that high school jock who their best years was that present moment. Later on, it's all downhill. Not for these guys. So maybe that's why they look at it like that. I'm not too sure. But so they would both go on to essentially shit on it as a student film, as they didn't like what happened to it. Still, I think it's very important for us just starting out to see that sometimes things do take a while, and sometimes ideas turn into something that maybe you're not all on board with, but for the purposes of advancing your career, it's a sacrifice. You sacrifice some, I guess you could say, creative input, creative control. So you're also jumping through all of these hoops as you're also trying to stay motivated about this whole movie making process. So it's a lot, you know? It can be really hard, and it can take a lot longer than we think. So only you know if it's better to fold or to just keep on going. For John Carpenter, he just wanted to make movies. Excuse me. A lack of a sufficient budget would just challenge how much of the movie that he had in his head could actually be done. It wouldn't stop him though. So by 1974, Dark Star was now in a whole new phase. What had started out as just some impressive student film built with a tiny little budget had now ballooned into this full-on theatrical release version. At the time that it was a student film, the effects were impressive. Impressive for a student film. It's what got Dan O'Bannon noticed. So, O'Bannon had a friend, John Landis, who would go on to become a legend in his own right. He knew a distributor, producer who wanted to put it in theaters. John Carpenter was thrilled. You know, here he was. The first movie that he had directed was going to be shown in theaters. Damn. That's pretty damn impressive, right? So, to get this done, however, he needed to chop up some of the student film, shoot additional footage on 35mm film in order to reach feature-length duration. That's what that producer-distributor wanted. They got it done. The movie was completed with a $60,000 budget. O'Bannon would go on to say that they had the best student film and turned it into the worst feature-length movie. Carpenter says he has never seen it in its entirety and would rather not. It's an amateur film to him, and that's it. However, I've seen Dark Star, like I had said. When I first got into John Carpenter, I also got into watching old films that he had mentioned influenced him to kind of see what he saw in those films, namely Howard Hawks films. So I thought it was pretty damn cool. They did all that on such a small budget, and how they really had to do a lot of out-of-the-box thinking, but also a lot of decisions where, hey, that's good enough, or that's the best we can do with what we've got. Can't just keep wasting time for a better idea to come on how to do something. They just had to go with whatever was in their head, whatever they could do in that moment, and just keep it pushing. Keep it pushing. So, I was actually blown away and inspired by what they did in Dark Star. Once you watch it with, you know, all of the logistical process that they had to go through in mind. So, if you saw Dark Star today, granted, you'd probably laugh at the effects, but it helped John Carpenter land Assault on Precinct 13, and for its time, it was a very impressive student film that had simply turned into an unsuccessful feature-length film. Kind of looks like if someone made a cheaper version of the original Star Trek series, but had the knowledge and access to use those special effects as much as the budget could allow, right? So the monster in the film, Dark Star, is a damn beach ball. Okay, it's voiced by Nick Castle, and it's pretty hilarious watching that. But the shots that they get, they do their absolute best. It's a beach ball with gloves. They do their absolute best to get you to show some, like, oh God, look at that thing. Oh man, that guy's getting eaten. Oh, well, there goes another crew member kind of thing. And you're more focused on the scene than on the details of what made the scene. And so it's pretty damn hilarious. And as they say, hey, they can't all be first round picks, right? So the film is an odd little mix of sci-fi and comedy, and not in the like slapstick way of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or even the Men in Black films. It's more of a dry humor. So over the years, it's gained a cult following, despite O'Bannon and Carpenter just leaving it in the past. And actually, one of the coolest facts that I found out while researching this was that there's a game dev related fact here. So on July 5th, 2015, in a tweet, Hideo Kojima himself stated that the iDroid female voice in Metal Gear Solid 5 was actually inspired by the computer voice in Dark Star and not the HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey. He also stated that since no one knew the film at the shooting studio that he was at, he told them that it was like the mother computer from Alien, also made by the same guy, Dan O'Bannon. I didn't know this myself, so I thought that was pretty damn cool that Kojima was a fan of Dark Star to the point that it inspired him to use a part of that. That's pretty damn cool for a film that two giants, O'Bannon and Carpenter, just write off and leave in the past. Another giant in another industry can look at it and say, no, I was inspired by that. It was just a stepping stone for them, but it was that good. So, next, what happens here? So now he's got a movie in the theater. You think you're on your way to the big time. It's just a matter of time before those calls start coming in, offers. Would you like to do this? Money here. Film school's over now. I'm making it in the big time. I'm going Hollywood. Could not have been more wrong. After Dark Star, John Carpenter gets no offers to make not a single movie, okay? And so, bummed out, to try to get noticed, he starts writing scripts. I found it to be pretty cool because sometimes, we can get down on ourselves or nobody wanted to play my game. Nobody left any feedback. Nobody cares, right? You're probably right. Nobody cares. You gotta make them care. You gotta keep pumping out stuff to get noticed, right? What's the alternative? To stop? So, writing scripts. That's what Carpenter's now adding to his directorial skills, his skills in getting what he has in his head to get it out, which saves money. And now he's going to add the ability to write. So I figured that Carpenter had probably gotten work sometime right after the resurrection of Bronco Billy, the no success, but the achievement nonetheless of Dark Star becoming a theatrical version, none of that really led to what I thought it probably would have. So to entice an offer, like I said, he started writing script, and he had already had the reputation of being able to make a movie on a limited budget. So after writing 2 scripts, one of them was called Eyes and was sold to a group I think led by Barbara Streisand, if I'm not mistaken, and it would be retitled. The other script, though, was kept. This was Assault on Precinct 13. So he being John Carpenter, was approached by producer J. Stein Kaplan, and the offer was to make a $100,000 exploitation type of movie, to which John Carpenter agreed under one condition: total 100% creative control. Why? So John actually he says that he considered this to be the biggest thing that he took from film school. You want to have final cut as a director. He wrote the script in 8 days. Okay? And when you look at the movie alongside Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo, you really see that this movie is really sort of an ode to all of those Hawks films and movies that he loved growing up. And it really shows. And so in the script, in the scenes, I mean, there's scenes where one of the most famous scenes in Howard Hawks' work is a gun being thrown to the hero, who turns around, immediately shoots it. That exact scene happens a few times in Hawks' work, but comes out in Rio Bravo most notably, and is notably used by Carpenter in Assault on Precinct 13. And it's actually a really fucking cool scene. So if you haven't seen it, catch it. I'll be honest, I have not seen the Ethan Hawke Lawrence Fishburne version, and I don't really care to. So he wrote the script in 8 days, as I said, and the budget for this little movie was something that he could get done. But Carpenter wanted to make it big. You know, this is a guy who is always able to outdo the budget and give you work that seems to exceed the quality possible on that budget. He wanted to use the best sound, okay? Professional sound, the right camera, the right lenses. And it would be the first time that he would use Panavision cameras, Panavision lenses, something that he says he fell in love with. And so a lot of the budget actually went on the sound and on the Panavision cameras and lenses, a good part of the budget. To save on costs, because this is the best way to make it look like an actual real big theater movie, is to use pro cameras, lenses, pro sound. And to save on the rest, little known actors and actresses were cast, and talent was almost literally squeezed out of anywhere John could find it. He called up his childhood friend Tommy Lee Wallace and convinced him to come to LA to help Art Carpenter as the art director. Wallace himself says he didn't even know what the hell the job was about, okay? I hardly knew what the job required, he says, but he believed in me. And of course, my price was right. It was typical of John during those lean days. He made the very best of whatever talent and facilities he had around him. So, that I found to be a pretty impressive quote, especially because it lines up with all of Carpenter's work at this time. And that really is something that continues through Halloween as well. As I was looking at the making of that, he really motivates his crew, the cast, and he does that because he knows he's working on a small budget. I would love to have a bigger budget and, spend more money on the cast, cinematic techniques that you can get away with and whatnot, but sometimes it's just not possible. So rather than letting your team know, the fact that, yeah, we might be a little over our heads, you motivate them. It's very how Sun Tzu of Carpenter, he puts his crew in a position where they can do nothing but perform. They don't think of the odds, we can or we can't. All they think of, we do. And that pays tremendous dividends, I'm sure, for the respective self-esteems of everyone in the crew who works with John, and it probably serves them pretty damn well in their career, especially if they're just starting out like he is. So the film was shot in 20 days, and this includes shooting on Thanksgiving. This was in 1975. It took John Carpenter from being an amateur filmmaker to a professional filmmaker, he says, because of all of the things he had to learn to make this movie happen the way that he had envisioned. So Carpenter says that this was the most intense shooting that he's ever done. Not had ever done. No. That he's ever done. This was in an interview I found on YouTube that had French subtitles. Specifically, he said that, here's an example. Lighting and shooting the jail cell bars was, as he says, a living nightmare. He was exhausted to the absolute max, he says, after every single day of shooting. To further exacerbate the issue, he had very little experience in working with actors, he says. He was frightened by them. So he had actually sat in on acting classes to understand them better, but otherwise he didn't even know how to communicate with them. You would think as a director it's something that you gotta know, right? Not at the time. He learned on the fly. He had to learn by doing, which is what they say is the absolute best way to learn game dev. Just learn by doing. There were surely some bumps along the way. I mean, ask any game developer, ask any amateur filmmaker. When you're trying to take that leap from an amateur to give your work the professional polish that you would like to see it have, it's a bumpy road, man. You're gonna be pulling all your hair out and look like Homer Simpson when it's all said and done. But the work will be done, right? So Carpenter says that he wanted to make Assault on Precinct 13 look like a real theatrical movie, not like Dark Star. Make it look like a real big budget movie. And no one really thought that was possible. But John Carpenter has a trick. So he says the trick to shooting on a low budget film is to shoot as little footage as possible and extend the scenes for as long as one can. That's literally what he says. So, how does he put this all together? How does he add to the crew? Because when you watch Assault on Precinct 13, I mean, there's groups of gang members coming in, how do you get that many people? So, actually, USC students helped out as the extras. And they actually had a lot of fun playing gangsters who were being gunned down, and they had a lot of fun finding new ways to die on the set and spill blood on themselves. It was a lot of fun for them. And for John, it helped save money. Everybody wins, right? So for the music, John Carpenter would compose one of the absolute most recognizable and powerful pieces of music composed for any medium. You can at me on that. Yes, I just don't see it any other way. Carpenter knows precisely how to create music for his movies. In his own words, I was fast and I was cheap. He says that when making music, he's riff driven. He, kind of like the Stones and a lot of classic rock of that era, it's really riff driven. You come up with a guitar lick or some motif on the piano, and that drives the whole thing. And this makes it catchier. He's aware of that. Carpenter's fully aware of that and uses that. And so he's very modest about it, but the riffs made on Assault on Precinct 13 and subsequently the Halloween film, it's impressive, man. It's impressive. And so for a guy that has, some fairly basic fundamental understanding of music composition, he's able to make some music that you just don't forget. and especially the synthesized sounds on Assault on Precinct 13 are just, you feel it like in your gut. The tension of the moment is really, really conveyed to you. Even if you couldn't see the movie, you could just hear it. It sets the mood. You know, this is a tense moment. What's going on? Something's going on here. Art director Tommy Lee Wallace had set up a makeshift projector in his raggedy apartment, as he says. And so this was to see, the dailies, as they call them, the raw, unedited footage that was being captured, right? So he was projecting this onto a bed sheet. Okay? So if you're trying to make something pennies on the dollar, know that Assault on Precinct 13 was made on pennies of pennies. Okay? They're using a makeshift projector projecting onto a bed sheet. Okay? Tommy Lee Wallace was so impressed that his jaw dropped. He stood up and projected a huge shadow onto the bed sheet, he says. It actually looked like a real movie, he said. He couldn't believe it. It actually looked real. John had done it again, man. So he had done more with less. It was a necessity to do so, rather than him just having the natural ability for it. He says, from all the interviews, John was just hungry. He says, I just wanted to be a movie director, and this was another chance. He didn't think that it would be a hit, but he just wanted to be a professional movie director so bad. As he says, trying to break into the movie business at the time, you had to make the best of every opportunity that you have. John Carpenter says that he learned tons while making this movie and grew literally from an amateur to a professional. It was his first professional attempt at making a movie. He had never used Panavision cameras and lenses. He had never used big budget Hollywood sound, and he had little to no experience communicating with actors and actresses. So while he says it can be difficult to work with actors, they're good people who all react differently. And him figuring this out was so key, he says. Again, doing more with less, squeezing the most talent out of everywhere you can. You have to understand the people you're working with in order to get the most out of them and the most out of yourself to get the most out of this project, right? So we have to learn how to communicate in a team, how to motivate that team, and how to contribute to the team's needs. If you have the responsibility of leading said team like he did, then those leadership qualities will have to be developed as well, if they aren't already there. He didn't have all he wanted to make this movie, but he had all he needed. And sometimes we can forget that that line is not so blurred. It can be a huge difference. But we can still get this movie made. We're going to have to think a little more creatively, a little bit more outside the box. We're going to be more tired. We're going to push ourselves to the limit, but we're going to be happy with the result because we're going to know that we did the absolute best we could with this opportunity. That's pretty cool. You can hang your hat on that, regardless of how the movie comes out. You can't guarantee a movie's going to be a hit, especially when you're just starting out. So the best you can do is literally do your best and hang your hat on that. So to conclude this episode, Assault on Precinct 13 did okay upon its release in Los Angeles. But when it went to the UK, they knew how to appreciate it in ways that maybe American audience just weren't ready for. And John himself acknowledges this. Assault on Precinct 13 is essentially a Western. Okay? And being that it's essentially a Western, American audience didn't really care for it. So in the UK, though, it gained critical acclaim status. Literally, okay? By the time it was spreading through Europe, this was already on fire. This helped him get the offer to make a Halloween movie about some babysitter murders. That was 1978's Halloween. And for this, John Carpenter wanted his name on there. So now he got creative control in Assault, right? To go to the next level now, he's a professional director now. That's why it says John Carpenter's Halloween. He wanted that. He specifically asked for that. And they didn't care. They gave it to him. It was fine, So from Assault on Precinct 13, John Carpenter had finally arrived. He'd really, really actually made it. And in the early years, there was just so much to do. There was so little time, and there was even less money. But he used the tiny budget to motivate himself and his crew, who at times were unsure of themselves, and definitely used all his film school education, everything he had learned to make that movie happen. We can do the same in our projects. Thankfully, we don't need to worry about shooting locations and travel just to make a game. Sure, we can, go on Google, look at some reference images to make, to build up the world in your game, but you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to go and shoot anything. We can do everything from the comfort of our own home or a cafe, on a train, or wherever we're at. So embrace the constraints of budget, skill, or time. Embrace the constraints. It's gonna force you, those creative juices to work, to get your creative output turbocharged. Get that engine redlining and pump it all out. There's just no other reason to get there except necessity. Necessity is the mother, as they say, in all invention. So if you need to make it happen, you're gonna think about it and you're gonna make it happen. That's just how it is. So thank you so much. That concludes this episode of Mud on a Monday. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. If you would like to be a guest, send me a DM. My DMs are always open. I'm going to be bugging some of my friends to be a guest on here. I'm currently testing guest recordings to get the hang of it first before I ask someone to guest on the show. So if I'm thinking the next episode will be up in 3 weeks from today. I might try to sneak one in before that, considering the whole coronavirus. It's better to stay in your home kind of thing. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it. You can hit the subscribe button if you want to be notified for the next episode. If you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter at Tertiary Map. You can send me a DM if you want to guest on the show. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe out there. Wash those hands. Keep 6-8 feet away. And for most of us in the game dev community, I guess it's just business as usual. We just continue on with our scheduled programming. So you guys take care of yourself. Bye-bye.